Greetings, brothers and sisters. So, the first thing is fake Facebook. Facebook sucks. There was some kind of new format that they were rolling out, and all these platforms are constantly updating their interface, whatever you want to call it. And it sucks for me because I don't want to learn a new thing for something that I don't really care about or use very often. Facebook for me does three basic things. One, it allows people to send me messages and links and things like this. It's a way for people to communicate with me. And I have a channel page, and if something happened to my channel, it's a way for me to let people know how to find me on another platform or something like that. So it's sort of an emergency backup thing. These are why I keep Facebook around, because I know it sucks. Same thing with Instagram. And so really, those are the major things that Facebook does in terms of why I would be on Facebook. And so they updated their interface, and somehow they separated my page, the Pockets of the Future page, from my Paul Romano personal account. They started to, brag about or tell me how they were going to do something great with my page. They were like, oh, this new thing's coming in 5 days, 6 days, or whatever it is. And then finally one day they just said, all right, you need to try this new thing, or do you want to try it, or whatever. There was a message box blocking whatever. So I clicked on it, and now I'm either logged into my personal account or the page. And it probably doesn't sound like a big deal, but it kind of is, because I receive messages from viewers on both my Pockets of the Future page and my, personal page. And I get notifications, so I don't have to, I can see that, all right, a message came in or whatever it is. And some of those things are timely. It might be a breaking story or something. And so now I have to log in and log out multiple times a day, which I'm not going to do. Because I just have enough time on these. I'm spending too much time on the computer as it is, and it's a hassle because I got to reopen all the pages. So I had four tabs open for Facebook, and now two of those were messages, like message page from my personal account and from the Pockets of the Future page. So right now, if you want to message me in a timely fashion, go to the Pockets of the Future page, because that's the one I'm going to leave open most of the time. And once in a while, I'll check my personal page, because I don't do as much, interacting there. I get a lot more messages on Pockets of the Future until further notice, unless I can contact Facebook and, have them reattach my accounts, which was, I don't know why they would do that. Just like stupid, unnecessary stuff. Complete bummer. Just more work for me on something that I don't even like, right? So that's Facebook thing. So the other thing is, this video is about how what you're seeing happening economically, the global reset, was inevitable. It happened. You're thinking, all right, this is happening right now, but it happened years ago when our ancestors left the farm and moved to the cities. I talk about this event. I don't think anybody else talks about it, and probably, they heard it from me because of homesteading, because I had this realization that at a period in time, a historical period of time, the 1900s, people who were primarily farmers and homesteaders, and it happened in different time periods at different places around the world, but it happened pretty much to most people, that these agrarian, village-based, tribal type of situations that people lived in ended, where they had lots of skills, they had lots of knowledge, and they passed these things on from generation to generation, and your family was really important to you. You needed your family and your extended family to survive. But then the people I call the controllers, this shadow sort of government type of situation, had this idea to move people into cities where they would do one specific task, a specialized skill. And that's all you would do. You would be a specialist And then the store model and all the things, the economic system, the currency system, and all these things. Then the Federal Reserve model, and the fiat currency, and no longer a gold standard. I mean, these things all developed into what we have now. But it was back then when our ancestors left the farm, and then what happened with all the subsequent big events, the Bretton Woods thing, making the American dollar the world's reserve currency. All these things fell out from there. And at some point, the debt-based economic system was going to collapse. And that's something for everybody to really understand, that at some point in the future, when everybody was then going to be dependent on this economic system, this economic model, they were going to have very few life skills, the ability to grow food or hunt and make clothing and just everything that you do to survive in a village-based system, in a tribal-based system. That's the way human beings are supposed to be living in one way or another, the family, that they were going to blow this thing up, right? The whole, way that human beings existed. And then you were going to be 100% dependent on the system for pretty much everything. You did one little thing for yourself, and you have some, maybe you can work with tools and you can do this or that or whatever. But for the most part, you're dependent on the beast, the system, to do everything for you. And at some point, the economic system was going to collapse in epic fashion, because that's what happens to the debt-based system. You can look at these movies, these videos, I don't know if they're still up on YouTube, called Money is Debt 1 and Money is Debt 2. Like, they were the introductory, sort of where I learned about the system. They're a good introductory understanding of the usury system. And they have all these quotes, I think it's those videos, that have all these quotes from famous people saying, don't use a usury system. It is a, pyramid scheme, a Ponzi scheme, because it's based in debt. Debt is wealth, right? Debt is, instead of having something of value be what you're using as a currency, debt becomes the currency. And that's what we have now, in epic fashion, where there's $2 quadrillion worth of debt. And so that meant at some time in the future, the system was going to collapse, and they were going to have to do some sort of reset to the economic system and take value and wealth away from people, the majority of people. That's what's happening right now. We see it unfolding in front of us. So it's really important to understand that trying to fix the problem now, this is trying to, close the barn door when the horse got out in, 1930, right? 100 years ago, this is when the problem was created, and this is the inevitable outcome. I mean, this is really important for people to understand, that you can't fix the problem now. The problem isn't something that, rebelling against the system or having some sort of revolution and thinking that they're holding out on you or they're just stealing your lifestyle away from you. Because again, I said this, years ago, that there was this promise when your ancestors left the farm, when they left the village, whatever it might be. The promise was there, this, unspoken promise that the beast was always going to be there for you. The system was always going to be there for your ancestors and for future generations. You gave up your skills, your multifaceted, multifunctioning skills of being a homesteader and living an agrarian life for all the comforts and, a limited work day and all these things, our economic system as it is now, where you would just go to work 5 days a week, whatever, maybe more in the beginning, and work 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day. And then you would have all this free time, and you could get all your other needs met by other people doing specific jobs, right? Supermarket, farmers, whatever, everybody being specified. And we could all lose our skills and ultimately our families and our, local support systems and things. We could lose all that and just depend on the beast, and the beast would be here forever. That the system was, invincible. And that was a lie, right? It was this unspoken promise that now is being revoked, right? Where they're saying, all right, now, we're no longer going to support you. Like what happened in Texas with that mayor, You know, you guys figure it out. You'll get your own electricity, right? Generate your own electricity. And all these things we've come to depend on, electricity and fossil fuels and, all of it, the system itself, are now being taken away. They're being revoked, right? You're just like, we're not here for you anymore. Or now that you're dependent on us 100%, this is your new deal. So I'm going to get into the new deal. And, this idea of fighting back against this is, you're just wasting your time and energy, and you're going to end up, in a worse situation. Why it's pointless, and it's just going to hurt you to fight back, be on some list or whatever it is, because this isn't something that there's a choice for the people that run the system or us. This is not a choice. This is the inevitable outcome of a debt-based usury economic system. I said this, years ago in 2014. I asked God when the system, they wouldn't be able to hide the debt anymore, and they were going to have to act in some way. And the overwhelming response I got was that there'd be an economic collapse in 2019, and then sure enough, here it is, right? 2020, where they had the COVID thing, and this is a way for them to present to you a slow, it's not going to be something that happens all at once. If they took away Medicaid and food stamps and Social Security and, all these things all at once, and they started grabbing people's property and, just all these things that are going to inevitably happen, and they changed dramatically what was, what you think you're entitled to, there would be riots, there would be revolution, there would be chaos, and the system would collapse. America would be just completely lost. So they can't do it that way. They can't just rip away things, and just say this, and everyone will lose faith in the system. People would take their money out of the banks, people would hoard food, and it would just be this lawless chaos within, a week or so. Everything would just fall apart. There'd be a loss of control. So they can't do it that way. They're doing it this way with COVID. They're doing it, it's a slow burn. They're not, boiling the frog, right? This isn't something where they can just, explode out with big events of life changes and things. They need excuses. They need reasons. They need you. My dogs are play fighting again. They were fighting over a plastic bag. They like to, Papillons like to chew anything. Whatever. I'll talk about that in a future video, but they are now wrestling around. I don't know if you can hear it in the background. But anyways, they had to have, a slow type of introduction to your new lifestyle, to the global reset. And, they had to do it in a way where people would slowly capitulate, and there's no resistance to it. I mean, there's nothing you can do because, again, the decision that created what's happening now, because that's how it always is. And this is one of the great teachings of the heartfulness system. What you're doing now in the present is creating your future. Your thoughts, your actions, your intentions, your plans, your work, whatever it is, what you're doing today, especially inside yourself, is going to create your future tomorrow. And what our ancestors did years ago is now creating the global reset, which is happening now. Our ancestors trusted people who couldn't be trusted. It's sort of like with Trump and the Trumpers. Trump made promises, compelling promises to people who were flipping out that he couldn't deliver on. And so inevitably, the way he went out after the election, the Capitol riot and all those things were going to be, that's the way it was going to go, because he's a flim-flam man. And we have these flim-flam men that have, years and years ago conned our ancestors off of the farm, and now we're all going to suffer for it because we're addicted to a system that's unsustainable. So let me, I got a few things to report on. I want to come back and talk about exactly what's happening and what people can do about it. So the first thing I want to talk about is food forests, and I had a recent confirmation about this. So food forests, there's famous people that you can look into. It's called permaculture and food forests, and there's a guy here, Sepp Holzer, he's pictured here, and I believe he's from Sweden. He's done this on a mountaintop, He's actually from Austria, which I should have remembered this because one of the practitioners, a young practitioner of the heartfulness meditation in India, I told about, Sepp Holzer, and she was from Austria, and I think she went and visited his farm and said it was amazing or something like this. He's one of the first people to do permaculture, and he does it in a couple different ways. But you can watch the videos about him. They're interesting if you're interested in this. And the other guy is Jeff Lawton, and I think he has some books out there. And he's from Australia. He might have some courses that he's done. I think they're kind of expensive, but maybe not. I mean, considering what they are, here's a good example of a sort of tiered food forest. And what food forests are is you plant. Permaculture is permanent agriculture where you don't have to plant the seeds every year. And so a food forest is something where you and usually they like to do it on a hill or something. Like Jeff Lawton has these tiered food forests where he has a duck pond, and the ducks will poop in the water and all these things, right? There's a lot of various there's stuff that's good for fertilizers, and then the bacteria grow and the whatever grows in the pond, and then it rains and the pond spills down the hillside where you have your trees, and underneath your trees you'll plant other things like asparagus and healing herbs and things. And after the initial input, after the initial work that you do, then the thing is permanent. You have to do very little fertilizing. The food forest, and the leaves fall and break down. And if you have something like this pond on top of the hill, which puts all these nutrients into the ground, there's ways you can use chickens, right? They do things where they put chickens in an area first to go in there and scratch away, get all the weed seeds out of there, and they'll poop and they'll fertilize the area, and then you'll get rich topsoil, and then you grow these food forests. And then they become permanent where there's fruit and nuts and things at the top of the food forest. And then, plants that like shade and things are growing permanently underneath them, things that can be harvested for various levels of food. And most people would drive by this and just see a bunch of trees. They'd never know that you have a food forest. So in the future, it would be hidden away from people. And there's food forests that have lasted for 1,000 years. I mean, you can search for these things. Jeff Lawton went out and found all these food forests that you can look into. And so it's something where, you do an initial investment, this idea of what you do today will pay dividends in the future, right? I plan them for future generations. So these food forests are, a good way in an apocalyptic situation to have food that's growing on a daily basis where there's, and again, you could do healing herbs and there's all these things to do with it. And so, I have this information, so I thought it'd be good to share you. This is here what they have, sort of this hill-like food forest. And I was talking to my brother, who is the caretaker of the Molina Ashram, which is on a mountain in Georgia. And so I had written a proposal years ago where there's people who are in charge of the ashram. It's all volunteer positions. There's nothing paid, right? And so when these Whispers of the Brighter World messages came out, and there's other prophecies and predictions in the heartfulness system about what's happening right now, what's going to happen in the future, about a breakdown in society. And one of the things was said that these ashrams would be safe havens, that these ashrams were charged with spiritual energy, and they were placed in, areas that were going to survive, and they were being built not only, on a physical level, but a spiritual level for the future for people. And if you see the you see the ashram now, the Kana ashram in Hyderabad, India, it's hundreds of acres. My wife and I walk through all these vast gardens, and they have agricultural holding ponds, and they're growing all kinds of vegetables and fruit, and just an array of things. I got video of this and stuff. And they're growing rice and things. They have this whole area where it's becoming self-sustaining, where they have enough food to feed people on, Sunday morning when they have group meditation. I don't think it's open yet because of COVID, but this is something we saw, basically a year ago, a little over a year ago. And it's an example of a place where they're going to be able to have not only, accommodate people physically, but they're going to be able to feed them, and there's a spiritual energy as well. And so, I thought about this in terms of the Molina ashram, this ashram in Georgia, because it's on top of a mountain, which is, a nicely sloped mountain that would do well with these sort of Indian tea gardens that they have, or tea gardens all around the world, where they have these plateau gardens, right? Where there's these layers going down a mountain, cascading down a mountain. And like I said, they fertilize themselves. And, this guy, Sepp Holzer, he had all these seeds, right? He would go out there and he had like 100 different seeds, and he'd just throw them randomly everywhere. And he would look at like what rats he ate and what deer would eat. So they would put things like that, in the seeds so the animals would stay away from his food. And then he'd come back 3 months later and he'd be walking through this area and he'd look down, he'd pick up a cabbage, like the things would just grow where they would, wherever it was best for them to grow. And, so they had these cascading mountain gardens. And my brother said he stopped me and he said, well, because he was interested in this, because now everybody's thinking about growing food. And I said, yeah, Peter, I gave this proposal, back in probably 2012, like 8 years ago, and how you would do it there. And the, Molina Ashram, it's got this hill and you have these plateau gardens and you grow grass. There's these parking lots on the bottom that are, there's a little bit of stone. I'm like, we put some grass seed down there, and you could have goats or cows and things like this down there, and you'd have natural forest areas. And so they could have animals on the bottom, which is flat, and they could have these, cascading gardens and things. And he stopped me and said, he was walking with Master Charji some years ago. Master Charji passed away in 2014. So this is probably back in, 2008 or 9 or something like this. And my brother said he was walking with Master Charji, and they were looking over, this hill, this mountain, small mountain that the ashram sat on top of. And Master Charji said, plateau garden, which was a confirmation of what I was saying, which was nice to hear, because I got a lot of pushback, and nobody really thought about it as being a good idea. These food forests, ways that people can start working now, like you can do things now that will create something positive for the future generations. There's this story, I don't know, because I got interrupted, my dogs were fighting and I had to stop, so I don't know what I've already said. Sometimes my dogs jump off the bed and whine or do something like this, and I'll hit pause and I forget I hit pause, and I'll come back and I'll talk like I'm recording and I'm not, and my voice is, I'm going to have to take some time off. My voice just isn't getting better. I'm going to talk about that, in another video. There's this story that Master Charji used to say all the time, and where there was an older person, he was planting all these fruit trees, and he's with his grandson. His grandson said, why are you planting these trees? You're never going to be able to enjoy the fruit of the trees. And he says, I'm not planting them for myself, I'm planting them for you. And so this is a way to sort of turn things around. This is one of the ways in terms of, producing places where food, there's going to be food in the future as the system gets less and less dependable. And that's happening, even now. So my wife told me about this GameStop guy. There was a hearing the other day on C-SPAN, and I was flipping through the channels, and I accidentally came upon it, and they were asking this guy if he wanted to be a part of the hearing. He was like, no, I don't. Right? And the hearing was just ridiculous. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But here's where he said some important things here, things that I already knew but didn't know the details of.
Let me explain to you that on January 26th, Game had closed at $77 a share. The following day, it closed at $148. The following morning, on January 28th, the stock opened at $355 and traded up to $480.
So that's significant in how fast it was going up, right? It was going up in an exponential manner.
At the same time, Game had 50 million registered shares outstanding and the short interest of 70 million shares.
Most people understand this already. GameStop had a total of 50 million shares, but they shorted 70 million. And of the 50 million shares, not all of them were up for sale. Some people were holding them. So in terms of availability of shares, it might have been 10 million shares that were up for sale. And the people that shorted GameStop had locked in that they had committed to buy GameStop. They were betting they were going to buy it for lower than the going market rate. But when the internet got hold, they said, all right, because these people are already locked in to buy 70 million shares and there's only 50 million shares available. And so they would have to keep on rebuying shares. They couldn't buy, there wasn't 70 million shares available in total, and not all of them were up for sale. And so that caused the price to skyrocket. And these big hedge fund brokers were getting, reamed, right? They were taking, they were having billions of dollars of losses.
In addition, there were about 1.5 million calls, which would call for 150 million shares. If the longs repay their margin loans and exercise the calls, their brokers would have been obligated by the rules as they are today to deliver to them 270 million shares, while only 50 million shares existed.
And so these brokers and hedge fund managers were screwed because they were locked in to buy this at whatever rate, and it was skyrocketing, and there weren't enough shares available. It was a complete mess, right? A mess that could have, caused the financial system to collapse.
So when the shorts cannot deliver the shares, the broker representing the longs must, by the rules of the system, go into the market and buy the shares at any price, pushing the price into the thousands. So as the price goes higher, the shorts default on the brokers. The brokers now must cover themselves. They push the price further up. So the brokers default on the clearing houses, and you end up with a complete mess that is practically impossible to sort out.
So to add this, the guy who's in charge of Robinhood said that investors were willing to write Robinhood a $3 billion check because this is what happened in the middle of this GameStop, the really bad day. The $3 billion bill. The amount Robinhood was expected to post, this is the orders that they came into, right? This is what they needed. Post for names like GameStop and AMC increased tenfold, the company said in a blog spot. Robinhood's operations team woke up to a request at 3:30 a.m. on Thursday. This was, in the middle of this thing. The National Securities Clearing Corp, the third party where it reports the collateral, CEO Tanev, this is the guy, told Elon Musk in a conversation on the audio chat app Clubhouse the amount Robinhood needed to post was $3 billion. And that's, what this guy's talking about in terms of them needing to come up with all of these stocks that needed to be purchased. There's only 50 million stocks available.
Would have been obligated by the rules as they are today to deliver to them 270 million shares, while only 50 million shares existed. So when the shorts cannot deliver the shares, the broker representing the longs must, by the rules of the system, go into the market and buy the shares at any price, pushing the price into the thousands. So as the price goes higher, the shorts default on the brokers. The brokers now must cover themselves. They push the price further up. So the brokers default on the clearing houses, and you end up with a complete mess that is practically impossible to sort out.
So you understand this. This would have been the inevitable collapse, at least severe damage to the financial system, which is already under stress because of COVID. This would have taken down the system. And I want to talk about that because people are like, yeah, screw the man. Well, you would have been eaten out of a garbage can. Like, this is how close that almost happened, right? Even though the SEC came in and did all this stuff that people are like, well, this is screwing the little guy. Yeah, it is. I mean, in terms of, you can't do this to the big brokerage firms because it would collapse the whole system when we all suffer. So here's the national debt clock, and this is the big number everyone focuses on, the $27 billion. And again, like it's, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's another $1 million, right? That's how quickly it happens. That was just $1 million more of interest and just another $1 million of more debt. This is our revenue, which is right now at $3 trillion. So this is the amount of taxes that's being collected, and this is going to be spread out. Here you go with the defense war. This is what's owed on defense war, which is $722 billion at this point in the year. And this is what we all are paying, in billions, 722, close to a trillion. Social Security, the payout is already up to $1 trillion, and Medicare is up to $1 trillion. And the U.S. total debt is $82 trillion with an income of $3 trillion. So if you were in this situation personally, and these numbers were different, they were, thousands instead of trillions, the, ratio between what you're making and what you owe on let's say a monthly basis, you're making, let's say, $5,000 a month and you owe $1 million. Like you can't, you can't, and I don't even, I could go through the ratios and figure them out with a calculator, but it'd be almost impossible because there's so much debt, and it's hard to understand where all the debt's coming from and when you owe it and when we all owe it. But it's the debt to income ratio is so far out of whack because this is the only income here, right, that's coming in, and there's all this debt here. The personal debt that people owe is $21 trillion. I mean, think about that, right? Between, everybody's collective personal debt, it's $21 trillion. And then you get down to the derivatives market that's using all of this debt, especially the personal debt, and betting against it, betting for people to fail, aside from shorting and things like this. They're financial instruments to create more debt and turn debt into wealth, where they're betting against things, and it's causing these problems. And then down here, this is what's owed for Social Security, $21 trillion, for Medicaid, $32 trillion, and the U.S. unpaid liabilities is $159 trillion. And so if you understand the gravity of those numbers, there's no way to ever pay off the debt. Or more importantly, make it look like we could pay off our debt. Our individual debts as people, our personal debt, corporate debt, all of these things. In terms of governmental debt, and they're just giving out all this money for, COVID relief packages, $1 trillion. I mean, trillions of dollars, what's it, up to like $4 trillion. When our income is only $3 trillion, how are you going to give back $4 trillion in stimulus packages? And then paying for all the vaccines and all the things to do with COVID. These are new added expenses that are happening. So many different things the government's spending money on. But aside from government spending, this is the real big number here, which is the derivatives market, which is at $617 trillion. And globally, it's at like $2 quadrillion. $1 trillion is 1,000 billion, which is a lot of money. It's hard for anybody to conceive of what $1 trillion is like in terms of being able to spend on things. We're talking about billions of houses and things like this. $1 trillion could buy whole countries, like you just buy a country. And then, a quadrillion is 1,000 trillion. I mean, just 1,000 million, which is a billion, is beyond most people's ability to even conceive of what that would mean financially. And what we have is quadrillions of dollars in debt. It's unsustainable. And so what they're having to do is a whole reboot of the system. What they're calling a global reset is really a global reboot. They're just, creating a whole new system. And all these promises they've made for Social Security, Medicaid, your ability to drive your car the way you drive your car, low fuel costs, your lifestyle, all these things, especially for Americans, that has to be reneged on. They have to say, all right, you're no longer going to have that. This is your lifestyle the way you know it is over. And there's they can't say, oh, the financial system is just, screwed you over. You still have to trust it, but in a new way. And by the way, we need your land. We need your cars. We need you, to move to the city. You have to give up your suburban lifestyle, whatever it might be. People would flip out. They would never accept it. They would never, you couldn't reason with them. You couldn't say, all right, look, this is what happened. All the things that I've laid out here, your ancestors believed this thing was going to happen. They left the farm, yada, yada, yada. Derivatives market, GameStop, the financial collapse, all these things. Your lifestyle that you thought you were owed was never owed, and now we're taking it back. And you have a lot of dopes out there, people in the truth community, young people, either young souls or young in age, who think, all right, let's just screw the man. I mean, that's what happened with GameStop, without really thinking, all right, how would this ultimately affect everybody else in the system? Because the system, as immoral and unethical and as rigged as it is, keeping us afloat. And I'm not, I've talked about how the system is bringing us in the wrong direction spiritually, which to me is the most important thing. Like I said in my video last night, that you have an eternal soul, and your life is, 80 years out of what, 1 trillion years or 10 trillion years or quadrillion years. As long as the universe exists, your soul, which is eternal, is a part of that. Eternal in the sense of the scope and span of the life of the universe is also the life of your soul. And so this life doesn't really mean anything, right? It's sort of a simulation we're living here. It's an illusionary type of, circumstance and situation. And so, doing damage to your soul's path or preventing your soul from reaching its ultimate goal of returning to the source is the worst thing you can do. And that's what our system does. It prevents our, spiritual growth. It takes us in the wrong direction. It, can do all kinds of damage to our spiritual journey and saddle us with addictions and grossness that we take in from life to life and remain trapped here on planet Earth, going in the wrong direction, going away from God. And that's, our system. And so the system, for that reason, has to come down, but it has to come down when it's supposed to come down, based in the divine forces. If GameStop was supposed to bring it down, then so be it. You understand this? Yeah, that's fine. But we don't want to do some stupid stuff to make the thing come down quicker, right, in a quicker fashion. And we have to accept that we're all 100% dependent on the system. Like, I have some farming skills, and my family and I are working on building a homestead, but I know that life would be, a lot worse, even though we would survive for some period of time. Again, it's all, predicated on how everything works out. You can't control your farm the same way that you control, the way that our system controls things now. That you're not guaranteed to bring in your crop. You're not guaranteed things are going to go well, especially when you have, chaos going out in the world in terms of people flipping out and stealing food and, everything the way it's going to play out. I mean, it's going to be just this, if you take away the controlling system and people have no concept on how to survive, and, people are flipped out off their medications, off their addictions, and, go into this sort of animalistic sort of mob-like mentality, gang mentality, then it's going to be difficult to live. Life is going to suck in one way or another if you have this immediate collapse. And so what they're trying to do, the people who control the system, and again, they're not good people, they're greedy people, all the things that you could say, right? Why would somebody need $1 billion? Why would somebody need $1 trillion? Like, these people these hedge funders who are already multimillionaires are increasing their wealth by using the strength of their wealth and buying power to screw the little guys, right, and absorb more of the collective wealth, which is all based in debt, and they're wrecking the system based in their greed in the derivatives market. And so they suck, right? They're not like good leaders, they're not good people. But what they're trying to do is, prevent the whole collapse of the system all at once. And there's nothing we can do about it because the system is bankrupt, it's immoral, it's unethical, and it's demonic, and it's based in debt. And this was inevitable. And so what's happening right now, they're targeting people, the middle class people, a lot of people who were maybe Trump supporters. I mean, in terms of the demographics, mainly white people, but people certainly who have money, suburban people who have, land, and they have, you have maybe some, 401k, you have a good retirement, you have, some sort of safety net of money and things like this. And those are the people they're going after, clearly, right? The people who live in trailer parks and people who are living in tenement houses, ghettos and things like that, they're already pretty close to living in Agenda 21 type of facilities where they're living in small spaces and, in the cities, because that's where they already live, in crowded areas, right? Urban areas. And so that, for them, it's not much of a leap or a jump. And those people are feeling like they're being supported by the media and the beast and, these various demographics of poorer people are thinking that, now we're totally being recognized and we're being supported. Why the people who, own things, right? People who are Trump supporters, people who are, maybe close to being millionaires, or they have $1 million worth of assets on paper, own a little land, own your own house, things like this, own a small business. Those are the people that are being demonized for being, greedy and sucking. And those are the people who are being attacked in the media. Those are the people who are now being, disenfranchised. Those are the people who are being marginalized as a group, right? Pathologized, because they're going to take your stuff, right? That's, they have to take your stuff, and it has to be done in a boiling frog type of way, because if they just came out and took it, there would be mass revolt and rebellion. And so they take a little bit of stuff, and you say to yourself, well, I'm 100% dependent on the system. See, what happens is the mob loses its mind, right? If they said, all right, Social Security is gone. People are like, I paid, $100,000 into Social Security, and they go outraged, right? People get, they go full whatever, Karen or whatever you want to call it. And they complain, people rebel, people would riot and things like this. And you don't really realize how dependent you are on the system, and that there's no plan B, that you don't have a plan B, that it's either the system or starvation. It's either system or lawless chaos. And so the system, as bad as it is and demonic as it is, we're 100% dependent on it. Maybe 80% in some cases. But to make that transition from being not dependent on it and being self-sustaining and developing relationships where you have a community of people growing food and working together as a collective to survive, thriving is out of the question, but survive. And also, how are you going to defend your food and things in a post-apocalyptic situation? And so this is a thing that most people don't think about. I think about all the time because I have a sense of it. I know the system can't be saved. I've seen the numbers, and I know what's happening spiritually. I know that it's bad for everybody. I know that, God and the divine forces are collapsing the system. I know it's run out of time, its expiration date. I know the yugas are changing. I don't know the exact time frame, but I have a sense of all these things, right? And there's no way to save the system because there's just too much debt. Like if you were in charge of the system, you'd be like, oh my God, how do I fix this thing? I can't, right? And you just have to do the same crap the people who are controlling the system, the controllers, are doing. You'd have to run the same sort of psychological operations. You couldn't be upfront with people. You couldn't tell them the truth. Again, obscurantism, which the heartfulness system is clearly saying needs to come to an end, where you are giving false information or withholding information as a ruler or leader and giving out disinformation. But part of that is because people are immature and don't make good decisions, and they go running off half-cocked and get angry when you tell them things they don't want to hear. People aren't mature enough to understand what I'm saying here. This is your situation. The system can't be fixed. And when it goes, you have no skills, probably poor social skills as well, so that even living in a family is difficult, never mind a village or a tribe. Most people can't live in a tribe or a village. They suck too much. Like the tribe, get out of here, you suck, right? But that's almost for everybody. Like people are too selfish and too entitled, and don't have a good work ethic, especially younger people. It's getting worse and worse, and that's the situation you're in. That you're going to have to go back to when things were harder, and the conditions are going to be worse. There's going to be radioactive poisoning. There's going to be the poles are going to shift. There's going to be big climactic and terrestrial type of events that happen. It's going to be an unstable time. Possible ice ages. Possible heat waves. I mean, it's going to be extreme stuff coming. It's going to be harder to grow food. It's going to be harder to survive, right? And so that's the situation that everybody finds themselves. We're completely fucked in a way, right? But there's a spiritual aspect to this in terms of our ability to advance spiritually, the heartfulness meditation that's, unfolding right now. It's the biggest leap in the history of the human species on the spiritual plane of existence. This is, unprecedented. People's ability to jump forward spiritually, it's such a huge opportunity and blessing. And the chaos and the hardness of the situation adds to it, right? Like I was saying yesterday in my simulation video. If you're, in a completely miserable, chaotic situation, you're overwhelmed in things, but you're able to remain grateful and use it as an opportunity to, see it as an opportunity to advance spiritually. It is, a golden time. It is just a blessing in every possible way. When things are, sort of, just nice, and I mean, that's why you had all these various native peoples, like the Native American peoples and the Aboriginal peoples in Africa and Australia and places like that. And people in Europe, the Druids, who were able to have thousands of years of sort of peaceful living for the most part. They were living naturally as sort of natural human beings. They had a good life in different ways, but they didn't advance spiritually at all. They were all just sort of, there was nothing really moving forward. They were just remaining in a sort of a spiritual rut, right? They weren't, they were spiritual people in a way, but they more worshiped Mother Nature and planet Earth, and there was no upward movement in terms of the spiritual journey of their soul. This one was happening globally in all these village-based places all around the world. Nice people with good morals, good characters, right? Family-oriented, in tune with nature, a lot of positives. But in terms of their spiritual evolution, it was just nice, right? They were just moving along, stuck in the mud, really not, advancing culturally in terms of, anything. Everything, was staying the same. And that's one of the reasons that there was this, global sort of outreach of people blending together from all these various different cultures and orientations to the world. And the Europeans were used as the catalyst to bring about sort of a unification of the world. It happened in a very violent and tumultuous way, but again, it needed to happen because people really weren't advancing in any, in a spiritual way, certainly, and then even in technological way and these other ways. We were just, everything was nice and, going in this, just a same day, every day type of situation. And so now when it's chaotic and there's a lot of, trauma and things that people are going through, it's a great time to evolve spiritually because of, suffering and, the intensity of the time period. And again, it's a transitional time period. But in terms of the point of this video, like what can you do now? What can we do now personally in terms of, certainly a spiritual connection is the most important. To thrive or survive in the future, people are going to have an internalized relationship with God. That's why the heartfulness system exists, to connect to people to God internally. And so that has to happen for people in the future. Like I know this personally as a fact. Like I can see it. It's just right there before me. I've been able to see this for years. Like my whole life I kind of sensed that the system was going to collapse in one way or another. Like as a kid, I couldn't conceptualize it as that. But I would look around and go like, how is this working? Like, how are we able to survive as people? Because people are so messed up and we were getting more and more messed up, right? I remember eating dinner with my, mom and dad. They used to come up from Florida. They had retired to Florida and come back to Connecticut where all my, my three sisters and my brother lived. And I was, in and out of Connecticut. I moved around and things. And so they used to come up to Connecticut. There was an elderly couple that had a house that they would, they needed somebody to sit, right? They needed, people like my parents, in this case, to sit in their house because they would go away for the summer. And my parents knew them, so it worked out for them. And I came to visit them. So I was in college, my second attempt at college. And I came to visit them. And like they had this crappy dinner, stuff that oh my God, I forgot about all this stuff, right? From my childhood, I grew up. And they had this crappy dinner. And there was, they turned on the TV. And we had these TV trays. And I just forgot about what it was. It was like 5 or 6 years since I had lived at home. And they turned on TV, and the show, I think it was called Dave. It was this guy was a reporter in Miami or something, not important. But the show, the TV family was sitting around having dinner and talking. And my family, me and my dad, my mom, were sitting there eating food, staring at the TV, right? Watching this crappy show because it's just, bad television. And I was looking at my mom and dad going, I hadn't seen them in, a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years. Like it'd been a long time since I'd seen them. I think I just moved back to Connecticut, or whatever it was. But I hadn't seen them in a while. And I was like, we could turn the TV off and actually do what they're doing there. We could talk, Not that I kind of really didn't want to, And so, but I just saw this in terms of the way people were hypnotized by TV, the way, just without being a truther, without being on my spiritual path yet, not having my spiritual awakening. Like I could see all throughout my life, there were times I looked around going, wow, we're not really doing that well as human beings. Like we're very dysfunctional. And I didn't know why. And, again, I didn't have the information, the ability to conceptualize what was going on. But I think all of this has kind of sensed that at one time in our life that we're not really doing very well as a species. And now that things are coming to an end, our system, like the GameStop thing, there's just so many ways, we're dodging bullets here, right? We're dodging knockout blows left and right in terms of the system collapsing all at once in a big scale type of, big bang type of situation where, one day everything is sort of normal, and the next day it's never going back to the way it used to be. I mean, those are these big moments that people have in their lives, these knockout blows, where, you're going in a certain direction, and then all of a sudden that door is slammed in your face and it's never opening again. And that's going to happen, in whatever, next week, 5 years from now, whatever, 10 years or whatever it is, things like that are starting to hit us, right? Things are happening, and they're trying to do a control burn with the COVID thing and all this stuff right now to get us to accept some sort of, lesser deal than we got before. But that's just a Band-Aid because there's no way to compensate for quadrillions of dollars in debt. The economic system is collapsing. It's going to collapse. It's already collapsed. And so the way that plays out is at some point we're no longer going to have the system to depend on. And we're going to have to figure it out for ourselves locally. And things are going to change drastically on one way or another. And so there are ways that we can do things now, certainly spiritually, but there's other things that people can do to prepare themselves, to see the writing on the wall and think about what you're going to need. And one of the biggest things is that initial shock. Again, connecting to God, having a spiritual system. Like in the Heartfulness system, you would do some cleaning, do some meditation, because when you're in a state of shock, and like this is when everything's chaotic, you don't want to run out of food and water in the first couple of days after some, major event like happened in Texas. Like you want to be prepared in some way. Again, each person has to come up with their own, whatever it is, right? You have to think your way through, all right, what am I going to need? And how are you going to stay warm? Like, how are you going to stay cool? Your body temperature, that's a big thing. People don't think about it now. But that's something that, when the air conditioning goes off and you're in Las Vegas in the middle of the summer, well, that's going to become a real thing really quickly. Then, of course, water and food, and then how do you dispose of your waste? These are all things you're going to have to figure out, right? Being in a city, there's going to be garbage and human waste being, everywhere, bacteria. I mean, it's going to be illness central and things like this. So if you're in a city-type environment, you're in an apartment, you're limited, right? All your water, how much water you're going to be able to store and things like this. But you want about a month or like probably ideally 3 months, I think a minimum of 3 months of stuff just to survive the initial shock. And then you can come up with a plan, based in the circumstances. And you can start to adjust to your new reality. It takes about a week, right? Stockholm syndrome. It takes about a week to, adjust to something new. And so, those are the things that people need to think about, everybody, because it's getting more and more reals, right? I mean, that's where we are right now. But putting your energy into stomping around and being mad and, yelling at the TV or yelling at your computer because you're upset about the way things are going and how unfair it is, that ship has sailed, right? Why are you doing that? Why are you pretending that, like people give a shit about, well, you think the thing's unfair or something, right? They don't care. The system doesn't care. The system isn't going to change. Your protests don't matter. They know you're not going to like the New Deal. That's why they're doing it in a, backhanded way. If it was a good deal, they would just come out and tell you, right? If it's a bad deal, they have to do it in an underhanded way. And so instead of reacting to, what's happening because they, something you can't change, decisions that were made, generations ago by your ancestors that put us in the situation we are now, and then our own, just going along with it for our whole lives and getting ourselves into a situation where we're addicted to the beastly system and the lifestyle that it affords us, instead of getting mad at that being taken away from you, realizing that, you have a limited amount of time to get your sort of ducks in a row and figure out what you're going to do next. And there's things out there. I just pointed out some things, and, each person has to figure it out for themselves, but there's the heartfulness meditation, which people can always do and connect to God, which could be a beacon to guide you through this difficult situation, and then get you to remember that the real reason that you're here, which is your soul's purpose, which is to reunite and to merge back into the source. And then there's all these other things that you can do. People have free time and they're just watching the same old stuff. And, you have people in the truth community just doing the same old things over and over again, complaining about the same old stuff, just being stupid and dopey about things and not realizing that there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity to expand your consciousness and go beyond what you're seeing. It's just, instead of playing one-dimensional chess where you're constantly reacting to every single move, instead of seeing, the game is rigged and that you have to go beyond this system, right? At some point, you're going to have to transition from the system you're 100% dependent on to something else. And an internalized relationship with God is a big part of it. Only spirituality will save this world. It's paramount, definitely important for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.